Let's start with Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Now, this game was supposed to be a huge hit. It's a Star Wars game after all, and it's a sequel to Jedi Fallen Order, which everyone loved. But for some reason, Jedi Survivor didn't quite hit the same heights, at least not right away. Still, this is a game that's definitely better than its initial reception might suggest. When it launched, the game had a lot of bugs, especially on PC. People were reporting frame rate drops, crashes, and all sorts of technical problems. It was one of those situations where the game itself was great, but the technical hiccups held it back. And, in the world of gaming, nothing kills the hype faster than a buggy launch. But here's the thing, once you look past the technical stuff, which has mostly been patched up now, Jedi Survivor is an awesome game. It takes everything that made Fallen Order great and cranks it up a notch. The combat is even more fluid and fun, with new lightsaber stances that let you really customize how you play. Whether you want to go full-on double-bladed action or switch between blasters and sabers, the game gives you options, and it all feels so good. And the exploration. It's even better this time around. The planets in Jedi Survivor are bigger, more open, and filled with secrets to discover. The Metroidvania-style design is back, so you'll be unlocking new abilities and returning to areas to access previously locked-off sections. Super satisfying for anyone who loves that sense of discovery. Now, some people were a bit mixed on the story. Without giving too much away, Jedi Survivor goes deeper into Cal Kestis' journey, as he deals with his place in the galaxy post-Order 66. Some players felt like the story wasn't as tightly paced as the first game, but honestly, I think that's what makes it interesting. It takes its time to explore more emotional moments and the larger implications of being a Jedi on the run. Jedi Survivor is a beautiful game. The environments are diverse and visually stunning. You definitely don't want to sleep on this one. Next, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. For some reason, it didn't get the love it deserved when it first came out. I mean, Lara Croft is a gaming icon, and the rebooted trilogy had been going strong, but when Shadow of the Tomb Raider dropped, it kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people. But honestly, this game is way better than its reputation suggests. Well, a lot of it came down to timing. Shadow of the Tomb Raider launched during a crowded time, with some big AAA games releasing around the same period, so it got overshadowed. Plus, some critics said it didn't do enough to innovate from the previous two games. People expected something groundbreaking after Rise of the Tomb Raider, but instead, they got a game that felt more like an evolution than a revolution. But here's the thing, what's so bad about sticking to a formula that works? The story, for example, is actually pretty deep. This time around, Laura's dealing with some heavy stuff. She's not just fighting to survive. She's wrestling with her role in causing this apocalyptic situation. The game explores her guilt and responsibility, which gives her character some real emotional depth. And that's something the series hasn't always done well in the past. And let's not forget the world building. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has some of the most beautiful environments in the entire series. From dense jungles to hidden tombs. The game is visually stunning. The tombs themselves are more complex and rewarding than before, with some really creative puzzles that feel satisfying to solve. If you love the exploration and puzzle-solving aspects of Tomb Raider, this game nails it. Combat also feels more refined. Sure, it's not the focus as much as it was in the earlier reboot games, but that actually works in the game's favor. Shadow of the Tomb Raider encourages stealth and strategy over pure action, which fits the tone of the game. You feel more like a predator lurking in the shadows, and it's pretty empowering when you take down a group of enemies without them even knowing you were there. So yeah, Shadow of the Tomb Raider might have gotten lost in the shuffle, but it's way better than people give it credit for. Next we have The Last Guardian, one of those games that had so much hype but didn't quite land for everyone when it came out. I mean, this game was in development forever. It was first announced back in 2009, and people were excited because it came from the same team behind ICO and Shadow of the Colossus. Two absolute classics, but by the time it finally released in 2016, it felt like the gaming world had moved on, and the expectations were sky high. The controversy with The Last Guardian mainly came down to its controls, and the AI for Trico, the giant bird dog creature that's basically your companion throughout the game. Trico is central to the whole experience, and players were supposed to bond with it. But here's the thing, Trico is stubborn. It doesn't always listen to your commands, which frustrated a lot of people. Some players were like, why isn't this thing doing what I want it to do? But if you think about it, that's kind of the point. Trico isn't just a tool or a simple AI. It's meant to feel like a living creature with its own personality, and sometimes that means being a little unpredictable. Another thing people struggled with was the camera and controls. They felt a bit clunky and dated, which made navigating the beautifully crafted world more challenging than it should have been. In an era where gamers expect smooth controls, this was a big sticking point for a lot of folks. But if you could get past that, there's something magical about the game. The bond between the boy and Trico, it's incredible. You spend the whole game working together to solve puzzles, explore ancient ruins, and escape dangerous situations. By the end, you're genuinely attached to Trico, and that emotional connection is something few games manage to pull off. It's a story that's told through actions and moments, not a ton of dialogue, which gives it this unique, almost timeless feel. In the end, The Last Guardian is a game that flopped commercially. If you're someone who loves deep, emotional storytelling and can appreciate a game for its artistic value, it's definitely worth checking out. Next we have Middle-earth: Shadow of War. It got a bit of a rough start, but honestly, deserved way more love than it got. Now, when it dropped back in 2017, the game had a lot of expectations riding on it because Shadow of Mordor was such a hit. And Shadow of War did a lot of things right, but there's no denying it also stirred up some serious controversy, which didn't help its case at launch. First, let's get the big elephant in the room out of the way: the microtransactions. Yep, that's where a lot of the initial hate came from. It was a single-player game, but Warner Bros. Thought, hey, let's toss in loot boxes and microtransactions. Gamers were not having it. Understandably, no one wants to feel like they're being nickeled and dimed in a story-driven experience. What's wild, though, is that they eventually removed the microtransactions completely. But by then, the damage had already been done. A lot of people had already written it off. And that's a real shame because, beyond all the controversy, Shadow of War had so much going for it. First off, that Nemesis system, still genius. I mean, creating rivalries with orcs who remember you, plot against you, or come back from the dead for revenge. It's such a unique mechanic that really makes every playthrough different. The world felt alive, chaotic, and personal, in a way most open-world games dream of achieving. Then, there's the scale of the game. They took what worked in Shadow of Mordor and just made it bigger. More fortresses to conquer, more regions to explore, and even more dynamic relationships with your followers and enemies. Sure, some people felt it got a little repetitive by the end, especially during the Shadow Wars portion. But you can't deny that they gave you a lot to chew on. The story itself also deserves more love than it got. It's a fantastic game that's really worth playing. Next we have Nier Automata. One of those games that didn't exactly explode onto the scene when it first launched, but ended up becoming a cult classic. If you've never played it, at first glance it might seem like just another action RPG. But this game, much more than that. It's one of those titles that, once you dive in, completely pulls you in with its depth themes and that emotional roller coaster of a story. But here's the thing. When it first came out, not a lot of people were talking about it. Sure, it had fans, but it didn't immediately blow up like some big AAA game. Part of that might be because the original was kind of niche and never really became a mainstream hit. So it had this uphill battle where people weren't sure if it was worth checking out. The game is weird. And I say that in the best possible way. It doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't give you a typical RPG experience, and the story can get really out there. You've got androids questioning the meaning of life, robots acting like humans, existential dread, and more than a few mind-bending plot twists. For some players, it was a little too philosophical. It's not afraid to get deep and ask big questions. And that can be off-putting if you're just looking for a straightforward action game. Then there's the whole multiple endings thing. It doesn't just have a single ending, it has like 26 of them. Now, most of those are joke endings, but to get the full story, you actually have to play through the game multiple times, seeing it from different perspectives. Some people love that. It's one of the game's strengths, but others didn't really want to replay the same sections to uncover the whole narrative. It was divisive, to say the least. The combat is incredibly smooth and satisfying. Platinum Games did a fantastic job with the fast-paced, stylish action. Whether you're dodging enemy fire in bullet hell sections or slicing through enemies in fluid combos, the gameplay feels great. So, yeah, this game might not have made a huge splash when it first launched, but it's one of those games that people have come back to and realized just how special it is. It's quirky, emotional, and sometimes downright strange, but that's what makes it great. Next we have Prey. This is one of those games that should have been a hit, but for whatever reason didn't catch on like it deserved to. And honestly, it's a real shame. Now, the controversy with Prey, it starts with the name. A lot of fans of the original Prey from 2006 were upset that Arcane's game had the same title, but was basically a completely different thing. There was no connection to the original Prey, no Tommy, no spirit abilities, none of that. So, right off the bat, some people were mad because they were expecting a sequel or continuation of the original, but Arcane went in a totally different direction. But if you put that aside and judge Prey for what it is, it's actually one of the best immersive sims out there. Arcane is known for crafting amazing worlds. The level design is just insane. You've got all these interconnected areas, and the way you can approach situations, whether you want to sneak, hack, fight, or even turn into a coffee cup. Yeah, that's a thing. Gives you so much freedom. And let's talk about the Typhon, the alien enemies in the game. The mimics are probably the most memorable. These little guys can disguise themselves as everyday objects, so every time you walk into a room, you're second-guessing everything. Is that chair just a chair? Or is it about to jump at me? It adds this constant tension that makes the whole experience so gripping. Combat can be pretty tough, but it's rewarding. The glue gun is such a cool weapon. It's not just for fighting, but you can use it to create platforms and block hazards. That's what's awesome about Prey. It's not just about shooting your way through enemies. It encourages creativity and experimentation. It's got that classic System Shock or Bioshock vibe, where you feel like you're surviving and outsmarting your enemies, instead of just blasting them away. Over time, though, Prey has gained a loyal following. People who missed it at launch are now discovering just how brilliant it is. The story, the atmosphere, the player choice, it's all there, and it makes for an unforgettable experience. Next we have Dying Light 2. Another game that stumbled out of the gate, but is actually pretty awesome when you take a closer look. So, when Dying Light 2 was first announced, people were hyped. The original Dying Light was a sleeper hit, with its intense parkour system and brutal combat, so expectations were sky high for the sequel. But then, delays happened. Lots of them. And with every delay, the excitement started turning into skepticism. When it finally launched in 2022, some people felt like it didn't quite live up to the years of anticipation, and there was plenty of chatter about bugs and performance issues, which, to be fair, did hurt its reputation right out of the gate. But here's the thing. Once you actually dive into Dying Light 2, you realize there's a ton to love about this game. First off, the parkour system is still one of the best in gaming. Running, jumping, and swinging through the city of Villador feels fluid and rewarding. They took what worked in the original and just cranked it up a notch. You really feel like you're flying through this post-apocalyptic world, dodging zombies and hopping between rooftops. The combat? Absolutely brutal. Smacking zombies and bandits with improvised weapons, drop-kicking them off rooftops. It never gets old. Plus, the day-night cycle adds a whole other layer of tension. The zombies are slow and manageable during the day, but at night, man, they become terrifying. It's a heart-pounding experience when you're scrambling to find shelter as the sun goes down and the city gets overrun. But where Dying Light 2 really stands out is the choices you make. Techland promised a game where your decisions would shape the world, and while it's not perfect, it definitely delivers some cool moments where you feel like your actions matter. Now sure, there's been criticism about the story being a bit underwhelming, but honestly, it's all about the gameplay with this one. The narrative is there to keep you moving forward, but it's really the moments in between, the chases, the exploration, the crafting, that make Dying Light 2 shine. Next we have Rage 2, a game that promised chaotic open-world fun, but didn't exactly blow everyone away when it launched. It's one of those games that had all the ingredients for success, but for some reason, it didn't quite stick the landing. Still, if you actually dive into it, there's a lot to love. What was the controversy here? Well, part of the issue was the huge expectations. The first Rage was pretty well received for its time, but it had some flaws. So when Rage 2 was announced, people were hoping for this massive improvement. Bethesda hyped it up with colorful Mad Max-style marketing and promised a game that was over the top and action-packed. But when players got their hands on it, some felt like the open world was a bit empty and didn't deliver on all that excitement. A lot of people also criticized the story, or the lack of one. The game didn't take itself too seriously, which in some ways was fun. The main narrative didn't really pull you in, And some players felt like the game's focus on pure action left the story feeling a little thin. If you were expecting deep lore or compelling characters, it might not have been what you were hoping for. But here's where Rage 2 shines, the combat. If you're a fan of fast, frenetic, chaotic gameplay, this is where the game really delivers. The gunplay feels tight, satisfying, and absolutely brutal. You've got all these cool powers and weapons that you can mix and match, which makes every fight feel dynamic and fun. You can slam enemies into the ground with special abilities, explode them with grenades, and shoot them to pieces with a range of awesome weapons. It's pure, unfiltered fun, and the combat alone makes the game worth playing. Plus, the world, even if it feels a bit sparse at times, is beautiful in its own rugged, post-apocalyptic way. There's this mix of bright colors and desolate wastelands. So, if you're into games that don't take themselves too seriously and just want to blow off some steam with fast-paced, over-the-top combat, Rage 2 is definitely worth checking out. Next, we have Quantum Break. It's one of those games that had such a cool concept. It was supposed to be this ambitious blend of a video game and a live-action TV show. Remedy Entertainment, who, by the way, also made Alan Wake and Control, really went for it with this one. But despite all the effort, it didn't quite land the way they hoped. Still, Quantum Break was way better than people gave it credit for. First, let's address the elephant in the room, the live-action TV show aspect. So, here's the deal. After every act in the game, you'd get a 20-minute episode of a show that followed the story from different perspectives. Some people thought that was super cool, while others just didn't. A lot of gamers felt like it broke the flow of the game. And, to be fair, not everyone wants to sit through 20 minutes of TV when they're in the mood to game. That decision alone turned off a lot of people. But if you were open to the idea, it was actually a pretty fresh take. The show wasn't bad either. It had some solid acting, including big names like Sean Ashmore and Aidan Gillen. The way your in-game choices impacted the show episodes was also a neat touch. It added this layer of interactivity that you don't see in most games. Now, when it came to the gameplay itself, Quantum Break absolutely nailed the time manipulation mechanics. You had all these cool powers, like freezing time, dodging bullets, and even creating time shields. It made combat feel fast, fluid, and just downright fun. There's nothing quite like freezing a group of enemies in place, unloading your weapon, and then watching the chaos unfold when time resumes. It was super satisfying. So, why did it flop? Well, aside from the whole TV show thing, a lot of people felt like the story was a bit too complicated for its own good. It was this dense sci-fi plot involving time travel, corporate conspiracies, and alternate timelines. Not everyone was down for that level of brain gymnastics, but if you stuck with it, the narrative was actually really intriguing. Quantum Break might have flopped commercially, but if you give it a chance, it's a unique and memorable experience. Next, we have Guardians of the Galaxy. This one's interesting because it kind of had everything going for it, but for some reason, it didn't hit as big as people expected at launch. I mean, you've got one of the most beloved Marvel teams, a great developer, Eidos Montreal, and a focus on single-player storytelling, which is something a lot of people were craving, but when it dropped, it just didn't make the splash it should have. So, what happened? Well, for one, people were still feeling the aftershocks of Marvel's Avengers. That game didn't really land well with fans, and it made a lot of people skeptical about Guardians. Folks saw another Marvel game and thought, here we go again with another live service mess, even though Guardians of the Galaxy is nothing like that. It's a totally single-player, story-driven experience with zero microtransactions or live service elements, but it got lumped in with Avengers, and that hurt its initial reception. Now let's talk about the controversial stuff. The characters. Some fans were thrown off because the game's versions of Star-Lord, Gamora, and the rest of the crew didn't look or sound like their MCU counterparts. If you're used to Chris Pratt as Star-Lord or Zoe Saldana as Gamora, it might take you a second to adjust to these new interpretations, but once you do, you realize they're actually great. The writing is sharp, the dialogue is hilarious, and the chemistry between the Guardians is spot on. It feels like you're right there with them, and the banter between the team is one of the best parts of the game. The combat also got mixed reactions. Some people found it a little chaotic at first, because you're only controlling Star-Lord directly, while the rest of the team fights on their own, and you issue commands. But once you get the hang of it, it actually feels really satisfying, especially when you pull off combo attacks with the whole squad. Plus, there's this awesome huddle mechanic where you rally the team mid-battle, pump them up with an inspirational speech, Guardians of the Galaxy may not have made a huge impact right away, but if you're looking for a game that's equal parts fun and heartfelt, you should definitely check it out.